Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started. It all begins in the capital of the Belfador Empire, namely Bringsia. However, there was complete chaos there now, for His Majesty was dead, and should have warned the guards about it. Just the day after the girl was married, her husband died. His name was Unreal, and he was Emperor of Belfort, and she came to his grave to honor her dead husband, and there was a little girl standing next to her. And this little girl was the Crown Princess Loctania. The girl was crying, for she had lost her precious father, whom she loved very much. And the girl herself, in order to become his bride, traveled a whole week to this place from a small kingdom. And when she arrived, when she saw his estate, she was very surprised, for it was incredibly large, and she had never seen anything like it before in her life. This girl was the fourth heir of the Darmal kingdom, however. She was a princess who was far from the throne. She tried to stay out of various troubles in her father's gaze. Siona was to quietly marry whomever he chose for her, and that was her only goal in life. However, this was the case until the receipt of one letter from Emperor Belfator. At that moment, all her goals and dreams crumbled because that's when her father, who could barely remember her name, told her to marry him. He also ordered Siona to keep her head down and not provoke His Majesty's anger. It sounded as if the fate of the kingdom was in her hands, but she could do nothing, and simply agreed with her father, accepting fate as it was. In fact, she was insanely reluctant to leave her home. She had no desire to marry a man who was 16 years older than she was. And of course, Siona had no aspirations to become empress and take on such a great responsibility. But the moment she first arrived at the estate, she saw a large picture of a man with his daughter, and she realized why they had chosen her. All because Siona was a simpleton princess who wouldn't ask many questions. She's just a puppet who knows her place. That's exactly what they wanted, a new empress for themselves. At that moment, the butler came to her, and turning to the girl, told her that she had to go to another place. She was a little surprised, but of course she followed him. And just like that, Siona, leaving her father with a cold farewell, found herself in a surprisingly welcoming place. The girl really didn't expect it to be like this. As soon as she was greeted by the man and his daughter, they smiled, and the girl bowed in respect. Loctania began to smile and said that she was very happy to be welcomed to the Belfator Empire and introduced herself, saying that she was the crown princess. Siona also bowed in return and said that she was pleased to meet her Imperial Majesty. The child was pleased to be honored like that, but she said the woman could take it easy and just call her Lottie. The girl smiled, calling her exactly what she had asked, and also inquired if she was sure of her decision. Loctania insanely liked being called that, so she outright glowed with happiness when the girl did, and said that of course she wanted to be called that. But at that moment she was suddenly very frightened and immediately ran to hide behind her father. He asked in surprise what was wrong, and the girl replied in a quiet voice that she was very embarrassed. Siona was welcomed warmly and very affectionately. They took into account her tastes in food and prepared everything according to her preferences. She had a contented husband, despite his age, and a sweet daughter. Certainly the girl didn't want to be greedy, but she thought that she could really become happy in this place. But now, as she stood beside her husband's grave, she couldn't believe that she was going to a wedding and ended up at his funeral. And after that, when Siona sits on the throne, the imperial beasts in front of her are just imperial beasts that don't trust her. These were the three guards of Belfort. In fact, the three kin that had helped turn the empire into what it was today belonged to these men. The eyes of the empire that guarded the borders was the eagle, namely Duke Bitrin Kidmalan. The language of the empire, which dealt with internal affairs, was the serpent, and Duke Ryan of Gurnia belonged to it. And the loyal protector of the empire was the hound, and Duke Aiden Tillander belonged to it. And it is the head of the imperial family, Lumnal, who has the power to control all these beasts. And the Emperor had been able to keep them on a short leash before, but now it would all have to be done by the girl. At that point, Lottie was still too young and powerless, but she should be able to cope in the future. Some say that one of the beasts killed the Emperor. However, others protest, and as long as they are bound by an oath, no one can harm their master, so they consider it mere slander. Siona, sitting on her throne, thought about it and realized that it was impossible to rule the empire without their help. So, as long as there was no hard evidence, she must cooperate with them. And then one day Ryan came to the girl saying that he had been thinking a lot about one thing and wondered why she shouldn't marry him. When she heard this, she was very surprised and did not expect this turn of events. But he, in turn, stepping closer to her, said that at that age, a crown princess could not ascend the throne, and there was no law that forbade succession through marriage. And so it will be until Her Highness accepts the crown. Ryan said he would protect Her Highness and even Princess Loctania, and asked what she thought about it. The girl immediately realized that this snake was up to something, but assumed that he was completely insane for daring to suggest such a thing to her after her husband's funeral. He in turn said that in exchange for her making him emperor, he could protect her from other dangerous beasts. Then Bitrin, who was an eagle, intervened in the conversation, and he said that it was all just absurd. Thereupon the man turned to Her Majesty and asked that she marry him, and he would surely be her safe shield. But then Aiden suddenly spoke up as well, telling them not to make him laugh with all this nonsense. He held out his hand to Siona and told her that he would be her faithful dog, so he asked that she marry him. The girl was just horrified and didn't understand why they suddenly decided to propose marriage to her all of a sudden, and realized that they were actually crazy. But then suddenly a little girl came running into the hall and said she objected to the whole thing. When the girl looked at her, she was very surprised, for it was Loctania. She thought she was sitting in her room crying, missing her father. But Lottie at that moment began to move closer to her mother, and after that turned around, addressing all these beasts. She shouted at them loudly and told them to stop all their dirty tricks. She also called them idiots and said they were unworthy of her mother. Siona was very surprised at this behavior. She thought about the fact that this was after all a fragile little girl and didn't understand where her touching fawn had gone. But suddenly Aiden objected to the little girl and said that it was none of her business. She, in turn, continued shouting, telling him to shut up and calling him very harsh words. Siona stood very surprised and remained silent, not understanding what was even happening, and more importantly, why. Ever since her husband died, she has to survive with Loctania in this place that is just full of different beasts. And now she's assumed the status of empress, so she must live up to it. So the girl, after calming down a little, sat back in her seat and said that they had, after all, just experienced His Majesty's funeral, and these were terribly inappropriate suggestions on their part. She got up from her seat and walked closer to her daughter and took her hand, telling everyone else that they were already free to go. As she left with Lottie, she told these beasts that they would discuss this at a completely different time, as it was definitely not a good idea right now. Then the men turned to Her Majesty and said that they believed she could help them. The girl said nothing to them, but silently walked out and slammed the door behind her. Shortly afterwards, Siona returned to her room and decided to have some tea to calm down and think for a while. The girl wondered what she should do now, for if she had to go home, it would be just terrible for her. But at that moment, someone suddenly turned to her. It was the maid, and the girl immediately turned to her and asked what had happened. And the maid, in turn, gave her a letter, saying it came from the kingdom of Darmal. Siona, on hearing this, was very much surprised, for she understood that it was a letter from her father, and suggested that he might demand that she return, so as not to be associated in any way with the emperor's death. But as soon as the girl opened the envelope, she saw a note in which her father requested that under no circumstances should she dare to return home. And as soon as Siona read about it, she was very surprised, because her father also told her to stand up for herself. The maid who had brought the girl the letter stood behind and watched her reaction. She was silent for a while, and then asked the girl if she might like to take a walk to refresh her thoughts. Siona was simply depressed. She agreed to the maid's proposal and went for a walk with her. They walked through the forest for a while, and Siona said it was peaceful and quiet. She liked it, because it was just what she needed at that moment. But suddenly, as she was passing by a tree, she heard some strange sounds. When she turned around, she saw a child sitting under the tree. She knew at once that it was Lottie, and could not believe that this child, who had once been cheerful and bright, had now turned into a very sad child who wanted to be hugged and pitied. For a while, Siona just stood there, and after that she walked over to the little girl and took a seat next to her, saying that even though it was a little chilly in this place, the breeze was still nice. The little girl, when she saw her mother, was very much surprised, for she thought she would be alone for a while. But at that moment, she looked at Siona, and seeing her bright and understanding expression, She smiled and agreed with her, saying that this place was really beautiful. Then the girl took her hand, and for a while they sat in silence. Siona noticed that Lottie looked rather depressed. She understood perfectly well that it was all because of her father's death. For to the girl he had been a husband for a very short time, and to her a loving father all her life. Then she looked up and sighed heavily, thinking of her father, who, after her husband's death, had written her just one letter telling her not to dare return. She is absolutely certain that Narian was a wonderful, loving father, for after all he was kind even to herself. The man said one evening that the coronation must have been pretty exhausting for her, and wondered how she was settling into her new role as empress. He worried about her all the time. Even though he was very many years older than her, she was still quite modest, and was always embarrassed. However, he supported her, and never insisted. When they first found themselves in the same bed, Siona didn't know if she could really do it. When the man noticed her anxiety, he decided to reassure her. He said, smiling, that in Belfator a man does not come of age until he is 20. The girl, hearing this, was very surprised and looked at him, asking what he meant. But her husband explained that there was still time before her birthday, so she shouldn't worry about anything. And at that moment, he put his hand on hers to reinforce his words. It was only one night ago, and yet her last memory of this man was so warm and vivid. Siona thought of the man who said he would wait until her first time so she would be of age. He was a gentle man and the only man Lottie had ever loved and known, and now she had just lost him. They both lost their husband and father, and Belfator is all they have left in the end after him. Her own father, those three beasts, and even Lottie herself had all forgotten one very important thing, namely that they still have each other. So Siona turned to Loctania and asked if she wanted them to make a promise to each other. The girl looked at her mother in surprise with tearful eyes, and inquiring what promise she was talking about. The woman smiled and said that they were both mourning someone important to them after all. So she wanted them to promise to always be there for each other. She, smiling, held out her pinky finger, saying that they were one family after all, so they shouldn't forget that ever. Lottie thought for a while. Then she agreed and shook her little finger in return. In the end, as Father Zion wanted them to, she would stay in Belfator after all, and Lactania and her would grow stronger and take care of each other. But for now, she would have to use the beasts as their power, and the cornerstone would be an important part of her plan. When night fell, the girl threw her cloak over herself and went outside and called Duke Aiden to her. The man looked at her in surprise and wondered why she had suddenly summoned him at such a late hour, and asked what was wrong. Siona greeted the Duke and removed the hood from her head so that her face could be seen better. The guy himself, in turn, began to smile evilly and asked what it was that she was having a secret meeting with a man at such a late hour. He came closer to her and also said that it was quite brave of her to do that. The girl was a little wary and said that she hadn't called him to play games with him. Then Aiden wondered why she had summoned him in the middle of the night. Siona became very serious and said she had one suggestion, or rather, she had come to answer it. She addressed him by his full name and suggested that they finish off Rion and Bitron together. When the guy heard this, he was caught off guard. He really didn't expect that a girl could call him for such a request. He pondered for a while. After that, he said that now he understood why she wanted to meet and, bowing, added that it was a great honor for him. However, Aiden also wondered how it was that she had decided to choose him for this. The girl replied that she had made that decision because of what exactly he had said to her quite recently. When her husband was still alive and Siona was going to the wedding, Aiden had met her in the hallway. The girl was wary and immediately wondered what he wanted. She also asked if he had come to demand that he be made emperor. The boy, indignant, said that of course he had not. It was then that the girl was genuinely surprised, for she had thought that he would look everywhere for gain. Aiden, for his part, turned around and said that he wasn't concerned about that at all, more concerned that she would make the wrong decision. Because of that, he'll have to serve alone because of those idiots. And that's why he asks that the girl do the right thing, and think hard about all the decisions that are about to be made. Siona, summarizing her answer, replied that she had concluded for herself that he alone was not at all interested in the throne. Aiden turned around and smiled and said that he was very glad that they finally understood each other. However, he would also have one condition to the same. He walked closer to her and said that each of them, the dukes, had a certain ability. These were abilities that firmly cemented the empire, and by using them, their bodies pay the price, unfortunately. But nevertheless, they still have to use their powers by imperial order. And in order to prevent Princess Lactania from using him like a dog when she ascends the throne, he asks that the girl destroy his Mark of the Beast on a special writing. In fact, this Mark of the Beast allows free control over these dukes. However, this mark, this oath, is in fact exactly the symbol of their empire. It was the one thing Siona could not interfere with. She agreed to his request, however, and told him that the person who could destroy the stigma was unfortunately not her. And turning around to leave, the girl said that it was Lactania, so she would be powerless in this case. But Aiden suddenly became angry and said that if it was really true, it was just an empty promise. Siona paused and wondered why he was so surprised in such a case, for he himself had said he would abdicate in favor of Lactani, and she was the future empire. In fact, the girl realized that if she actually agreed and did this, she could ensure her safety and her power. Then, in order to get him out of her mind, she wondered if his promise had been nothing but nonsense. Aiden, hearing this, became very angry and thought that this woman was just pathetic. No doubt he felt a little sorry that her husband had passed away so early in life, but it didn't make him feel any better either. The guy standing behind at the funeral looked at his rivals and realized that they were definitely not the ones who killed the emperor, because he didn't even feel the urge to kill. Aiden decided to just wait until the girl returned to her homeland. He thought it would be soon, so he didn't insist on anything. All this time he just stood there silent. Then Siona looked him in the eye in surprise and asked him what decision he was making. The man in turn wondered if that was all. Would she not have more conditions for marriage? Everything, she replied, which is not at all. It is only part of their bargain. She'll marry him if he brings her the man who killed her husband. The boy, hearing this, laughed. He realized she was using it as an excuse to get rid of the other beasts. Of course, the truth about the death didn't matter to Siona at all. It was just the way she found a reason to deal with the snake and the eagle. It was as if the girl was playing chess. Aiden was her most important piece to take out the pawns. But then suddenly the man said that they had sworn chains, by the way, and if one of the three betrayed his master, the others would be seized with the desire to kill him. But on the day His Majesty died, Aiden felt absolutely nothing, and because of that, one could conclude that they were not at fault. But then suddenly he smiled and said, suggesting that regardless of the culprit, Her Majesty wished the two to disappear anyway. That's it. She pretended to ponder and realized that this guy was pretty quick-witted and grasped just on the fly. Then the girl said with a smug look that everything was definitely correct. The next morning, all the beasts were already lined up in her throne room. Siona, when she went inside, immediately saw them and said that they had come after all. Then the girl took her seat and said that in that case she agreed. If they wanted her to marry, then so be it. The men, when they heard this, immediately became wary and began to listen to her intently. Rian smugly walked over to the girl and kissed her hand, wondering if she had finally made her choice. Siona quickly took her hand away from his and said that not at all. She hadn't decided who she wanted to marry yet. One of them is definitely going to be her partner for life, and yet she barely knows each of them. That's why she came up with a special plan to make her final decision. Siona said it consists of her going on 2 dates with one of them every month, and then picking the one she really likes the most. The girl decided that this way she would still have the advantage, because any hint of weakness and they would just tear her to shreds. Siona realized that she was like being held at gunpoint, so she needed to be on her guard and very careful at all times. Well, the girl also told them to keep in mind that she likes kind and caring gentlemen who notice every little detail. The men immediately looked at her and began to smile. They were satisfied with this kind of competition, and the girl thought about the fact that now they should hide their fangs, and then the games would begin. The next day, a butler suddenly came to the girl and told Her Majesty that the Princess of Lactation was waiting for her in the parlor. Siona, when she heard this, was very surprised and wondered why this was so. And the man, putting his head down, said that apparently Her Highness's aunt, the Marquis of Senwood, had paid her unexpected visit. The girl immediately realized that if Lottie was looking for her, things hadn't gone so well after her meeting with her aunt. She had an incredibly bad feeling, and soon, when she entered the living room, The girl immediately ran to her mother to greet her and give her a hug. As they hugged, Siona said she looked sad and asked if she was okay. The girl laughed and replied that she was fine, so she didn't have to worry. Then she decided to ask about something else, and said that she knew that the girl had met with those dukes again, and wondered what she had told them. Bottom line, Siona, smiling, told her not to worry, because she wasn't planning to remarry, at least not anytime soon. That's right. When Lottie heard this, she was just overjoyed and said that if it was true, it was just wonderful. But then suddenly, with her head down, she said that if she did like one of them, she would have to do it. The girl immediately noticed that her straightforward voice was trembling, as if she was about to pay. So she wondered if the Marquise had said something to her. Lottie then, with tears in her eyes, said that she was saying that if Siona were to marry again, she would return to Darmil. So if she makes a marriage alliance with one of these dukes, at least she will be safe. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised and assumed that Marquise was probably aware of the situation, since she was talking about being safe in this way. She realized that if her marriage made one of the dukes emperor, it was quite possible that Lactania would be killed. They all said they would abdicate in her favor when the time came, but what they really want is to get rid of their brand of beast. And with all that in mind, she knows they'd have no reason to let the last holder of that oath live. Still, she really wants all of her to marry for her own good, and it's very satisfying for her. The girl was silent for a while. Then she turned to Lotta and told her that she had no plans to marry, nor did she intend to return to Darmil. Well, then suddenly the girl cried even more, and said that in that case she would be in great danger. Siona put her arm around her and asked that she let the adults deal with these issues, and all she needed at the moment was someone to share the delicious sweets with. Lottie could not believe her happiness. She was incredibly pleased that her mother was so protective of her. But then suddenly, she put her head down and said that she had decided that she would hurry up and take the throne to protect her. She's going to make sure no one can hurt them, even if it takes away her childhood. When Siona heard this, she was very surprised, for she had never heard of children saying such things before. But then suddenly she stood up, and clenching her hand into a fist, thought that surely her father's death must have had a great effect on the girl's character. Then she bowed before Lottie and thanked her, saying that in that case she would have to repay her in kind. Then she held her hand up and said that henceforth, the Marquis of Senwood was forbidden to appear in this palace. When Lotta heard this, she was very surprised, but she also rejoiced. At that moment the lady turned to Tito, the butler, and he said that he would do it right away and notify everyone. He said he would do as Her Majesty commanded, for to him her word was law. When he left to fulfill her request, Lottie turned to her mother and said in a trembling voice that, if this was all about her, I really didn't have to do it. But Siona said that the Marquise would try to get guardianship over her, and being her guardian was like being an empress. And such a selfish man is utterly undeserving of even the slightest share of custody over a child as beautiful and bright as Lottie. She hugged her daughter and said from the bottom of her heart that she would definitely always protect her, so she didn't have to worry about it. By then, Tito had returned, and the girl turned to him and told him that the late emperor had said that she could rely on him. He also told her that she could ask for help when she needed it. The man smiled, and he actually felt good at those words, for he had always been loyal to the emperor all his years that he had spent in this estate. He had helped him. The girl smiled and also said she was looking forward to him becoming her chamberlain. That is, the closest to the monarch with a luga with access to the private chambers. Tito was ready to cry when he heard this. He bowed before the lady and said that the rest of her life would be devoted to serving Her Highness and the princess. The girl was really pleased by these words too, and she thanked him for his loyalty and understanding. Some time had passed since then, and Siona went on her date. It was the day of the snake, and they were sitting in the gazebo having a cup of tea. Rian, stirring the sugar in his mug, said that he had heard that the girl had forbidden the Marquise to appear in the palace. The girl, when she heard this, pondered for a while, and he in turn said that Princess Benita Senwood is a rather ambitious person, and even he knows it. He looked at her in surprise and wondered if the girl really believed that a ban would be enough, for he was sure in turn that Her Highness would not give up so easily. Siona, when she heard this, was incredibly surprised. He addresses Benita as Her Highness, and she realized that it was a clear provocation on his part. However, it was still a mystery to her as to what it was for. Then she wondered if he had even the slightest desire to be on her side in situations like this. But the guy in turn smiled and said that this cake was the most famous cake in all of Brinza, the capital of their empire, and he had made it especially for her since she was very fond of sweets. And smiling, he said he really hoped that cleared things up for her. In fact, the cake really was marvelous, both in appearance and taste. Siona at this point suddenly noticed that this guy is incredibly socially incompetent. He's a completely ignorant person. Well, then she turned to him and asked him to tell her why the guy suddenly started calling the Marquise a princess. At this point, he made a look of great surprise and explained that it was all because of the oath. Because, after all, she too had luminal blood flowing in her. Siona, when she heard this, became very indignant and then asked, "Does he really mean to say that she or her son could control the beasts?" The guy did not answer anything, but only waved his hands in different directions. The girl at that moment realized that something was obviously wrong, for she did not understand why the beasts had not yet attacked her, since that would really be true. These are the same men who lined up to marry her before Lactania could take the throne. So after calming down, the girl turned to Ryan and said that if what he was saying was true, then the Marquise would have been killed long ago in that case. And indignant, she said that she did not consider liars like him fit to be husbands. But the man replied in a nonchalant voice that he had not lied to her at all, and smiling, said that since he liked her wit, he could still let her in on another secret, and then said that the Staynuds had a way to take the throne. Siona tensed a little, then wondered what it might be in such a case. Ryan was silent for a while, and afterward he said that if they killed the last direct heir, they could get their throne as well. The girl was dumbfounded by such news. However, after a little reflection, she realized that it all really made sense, and that's why Lottie hid behind her back when they first met Benita at the funeral. The man, seeing her worried expression, suddenly smiled and wondered if the princess was bothering her. But the girl didn't say a word. Then he added that that was why, if he married her, he could wipe the Senwoods off the face of this planet. Siona, by this time already recovered and turning to the Duke, said that if it was a question of Lottie's safety, any one of them could provide it. And in this he was no different from the other claimants. The man replied that he, in turn, knows most of his strengths, and that is something they also possess, but he knows what sets him apart from everyone else. The girl looked at him in surprise, for he was trying with all his might to stall for time, but then inquired what he thought it was. And Rian replied that he was the most radiantly handsome among them all, so she could choose him even looking only at that criterion. Siona, when she heard this argument, froze like a stone, and then said that she liked more masculine people after all. They're smarmy guys like him. The man, upon hearing this, was very surprised and said that he was actually everything. But the girl replied that he thought so because taste is subjective, and also wondered if that was all he had to offer. Then the guy replied that unlike Chicken Brain and Idiot, he also has superior intelligence. No one knows the state of affairs in Belvedere better than he does. Siona made an indifferent expression and said that there were quite a few talented people in this empire. She only needed a few people to replace one of them. But afterwards she smiled and said he was actually much less attractive. She smiled and said he was actually a lot less attractive than she thought. The man was amazed that she was even speaking, for he had a rather high self-esteem, and had always thought himself better than the rest. Ryan was silent for a while, and then he asked in a shaky voice if it was really true. The girl, smiling, thought that he was probably hearing it for the first time, because he looked absolutely shocked. But she smiled and suggested to end their date since they had nothing more to discuss. She also said that he could just leave now. Shortly afterward, when Siona went outside with her maid, they were caught in a heavy rain. The girl was very surprised, not understanding how this had happened at all. The maid replied that she would call a carriage for them. In a second they were in a dry wagon and on their way back to the manor. Siona was very tired, and she didn't understand why the journey from the villa had seemed so long. But then suddenly she looked out the window and noticed something strange, and immediately asked in surprise if it was really Bitrin. The maid who rode beside her wondered in surprise if Duke Bithrin was beside her. Siona herself was very surprised and did not understand what he was even doing, because it was raining very hard outside, and he did not even have a carriage with him. and he was all wet. So the lady turned to the coachman and asked him to stop for a moment. They did so, just in front of the man who had his back to them. Siona, in turn, immediately began to address Duke Kidmelin. The man was a little wary, but he recognized the beautiful voice immediately. When he turned back, he saw that the door to the wagon was open, and Siona, reaching forward, told him to come in, or he would be quite ill. The man stood in front of the wagon for a while longer, not understanding why she had suddenly decided to invite him. But he agreed and climbed in. Soon afterward, the carriage went on, and now the three of them were sitting in the carriage already in a very awkward silence. The man looked down all the time, and with his muddy rain boots he even stained the girl's dress. Siona looked at him when she saw this, and he immediately removed his feet, when the girl wondered if he was afraid of getting her dress dirty. The man said nothing to this, and she, in turn smiling, said that he should worry more about himself, for he could have gotten very sick indeed if he had stood out in that cold a little longer. Of course, Siona couldn't just drive by and leave the poor bird to its fate. After all, there's no telling how long she'd have to stay there. Then the showcase said that after all, she was a member of the imperial family, so he was not allowed to get on the carriage with her. However, the girl objected, and said that he was precisely one of the pillars of the empire. Therefore, he should not neglect his health in any way. Soon they were already starting to drive up to the estate, and the weather outside had settled down completely. Even the sun came out. When the girl looked out the window, she said it was just perfect since the rain had just stopped. Then she glanced at the man sitting opposite, and wondered if it was true that the next time they would see each other would be at the villa, and then she could hear all about his adventures. Bistreet answered nothing to this, but only looked at her for some time, and soon, when they reached the manor house, the girl put him out. As soon as Siona returned to the manor, she immediately changed into dry clothes and went to her office to take care of business. Tito came to her, and the girl asked if there was any new information about the oath. The man gave her the papers and said that everything was contained in them. After carefully studying these papers, she read out that the very first emperor had tamed 3 beasts. Tito in turn explained that this legend tells how the snake, the eagle, and the hound became human because of this oath. The girl asked if this meant that the real beasts had become human, and wondered if it was all made up by the old people. But the man, lowering his head, said that by the time this story was passed down, they were already in human form, and some interpret it as a nickname from the first emperor for the boys who followed them. But one thing was certain, namely, that they all swore allegiance to the emperor, and ended up gaining strange abilities that they possess to this day. Duke Gurnia with his powers can brainwash people and make them do all his bidding. Duke Kidmelin sees right through things thanks to his great eagle eyesight. In other words, Rian could have used his abilities on the girl to ascend to the throne, and Bistreet too. He could find out that she'd made an alliance with Aiden, and now that Siona found out about it, she was too afraid. She asked the butler in a trembling voice if Duke Bittern's eagle eyes could read a man's mind. The man, upon reflection, replied that that is exactly what consensuses are. Some say that the first eagle could even read the hearts and minds of men, but no one knows it reliably. Then the girl even began to worry a little and wondered what about Aiden, what his abilities were. Tito replied that he was becoming a wild animal, and when the girl heard that, she immediately felt heavy at heart. She could not believe that it was really possible. She was silent for a while, and then questioned her aide if she was correct in realizing that he was becoming a rabid dog that could not be controlled. The man bowed and replied that he had personally seen the previous duke wreak havoc. He was displaying the overwhelming strength of an unstoppable berserker, and only his master could tame this wild beast. Siona suddenly became very serious, and said that in that case she must ask him if this vow could be passed on. She really hoped that just for a moment she would be able to tame this wild beast, and make it do what she wanted it to do. Tito in turn said that she would have to ask her Imperial Majesty about it. The girl replied that she understood now. She herself realized that if she couldn't control Aiden for long, something terrible would happen. But then suddenly the butler said with a heavy sigh that she shouldn't worry about anything anyway. The man explained to her that they certainly wouldn't use their abilities so frivolously because they valued their lives very much. In fact, after 2 bouts of berserk mania, madness drove the Duke as far as suicide. So there's always a pretty hefty price to pay for power, and men know this very well. However, Siona, when she heard this, was so surprised that her hands even began to shake. It was not surprising to the girl after all, for Aiden was the 27th Duke of his dynasty. The Belfator Empire is barely 300 years old, so that means there's a new duke about every 10 years. The girl still couldn't get those words out of her head, that they were paying for this with their lives. And the use of this power was most likely done on their master's orders. The strange structure of Belfator's empire, where the emperor considers his defenders his beasts, simply amazed the girl, and she in turn was just a little nobody trying to make herself useful in the world. And so from that moment, a few more days passed, and at last it was time for a date with the eagle. She went back to the villa to meet him there. They were playing chess, and the man was telling the story he'd promised. Why on earth he was out in such terrible weather all alone on the street. He said he'd broken up with her. Siona now understood a little why he had been out in the rain. Bitrin explained that when he wanted to end it all, the girl said they should meet and talk. However, she never came to see him on the day in question. Since he never heard from her, he assumes that she simply sorted out her feelings on her own. The girl was pretty much straightforward, so she asked him if she had made him look like an idiot like that by making him wait so long. Bitrin was still upset about the whole situation. However, he tried to accept and said that he thought it was for the best. Siona, seeing his reaction, was very surprised and wondered what he even meant, for she did not understand at all how he felt. The girl didn't know how he could deny everything, if he really felt love for this lady. The man, continuing to play chess, asked if she didn't like that about him. She, in her turn, decided to make up for this conversation and said that it was rather difficult to understand it. She really has no idea what he's thinking. And then she suddenly thought about the fact that she was probably best at getting along with Aiden. Bitrin was silent for a while. Then he addressed Her Majesty in a cold and quiet voice, saying that it seemed to him that she had already given her heart to another. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised. She immediately thought that he had probably used his power and therefore knew about it. But then she tried to reassure herself with the fact that it couldn't be, because Tito had said they were paying a pretty penny for her performance. But Siona was still worried, for she didn't know what the price was, and she supposed it might not be that high. But then suddenly, after some time of silence, the man turned to the girl and inquired why she had stopped for him that day. Siona calmed down a little when she heard the question, and then explained that it was pouring rain that day, so she couldn't just leave him there. She wondered if he thought she needed some other reason to do something so kind. You could see that the Duke was very worried. He said he understood, but afterwards he asked her to choose him. He said that she just had to do it. However, it was not as insistent as in the case of the snake. Siona in turn cautiously inquired as to why he thought she should choose him. The man then explained that the snake would just take her and kill her, and that dog would kill the princess. But then suddenly he smiled a little and said that she shouldn't worry. After all, if she chose him, no one would get hurt. Siona was silent for a while. To her, this information was very surprising, but then she wondered why he wanted to be emperor so badly. The man in turn explained that as she could tell, he hated being Kidmillan. When the girl heard this, she was surprised. She couldn't believe that he really wanted to take and renounce his surname. In this way, he was misleading her even more, and she could not understand him or Rihanna in any way. But then suddenly he apologized to the girl and said that he didn't want to develop such a dark theme when they had celebrations ahead of them. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked, "What does he even mean?" And he in turn explained that it was Her Majesty's birthday in a few days. And of course it was true. A few days had passed since then, and Lottie, who was dressed very smartly, held balloons in her hands and came running to her mother. "I congratulate her on her birthday." She also had a huge bouquet of roses in her hands, and when Siona saw it, she was very surprised. And the girl who came downstairs looked around at the decorated walls and wondered what it was all about, for she was not prepared for such a sight. But the princess, with a huge smile on her face, said it was her surprise birthday party. The girl was still very surprised, for she had never yet received such birthday greetings in her own home. Siona, with tears in her eyes, thanked her profusely and told her that these roses were just unbelievably beautiful. and behind her there was also a huge banner that wished her, as a mom, a happy birthday. But then all of a sudden Rihanna's brother, whose name is Melbrid, came over, and when Lotta saw him she got very angry and asked what he was even doing there. The boy stepped closer to her and in a trembling voice said, laconically, that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and inquired how she had been doing all this time. Siona, when she saw this boy, thought of him as the truest little angel, for he was indeed incredibly beautiful. Then the lad bowed and turned to Her Majesty and said that he had heard that his brother was causing trouble, so he really apologized for his rude behavior. When the girl heard this apology, it was very surprising, because she did not expect the guy to be so mature that he even came to apologize for his older brother. Lottie in turn was still very angry, and frowning, said that she hadn't actually invited him, so she wanted him to leave immediately. The lad at this point went to the side and said that he had brought them something. But then suddenly Duke Tillander came into the room, and the girl, seeing him, was very much surprised. Aiden came closer and smiled radiantly and wished the girl a happy birthday. Then Lotta looked at him and also angrily said that she hadn't actually invited him either. The man replied with a smile on his face that actually nothing was more important than Her Majesty's birthday, and the lack of an invitation would certainly not stop him. Siona immediately moved closer to him and wondered in his ear, has he forgotten? After all, lessons are the only thing that can destroy his oath, so he should be polite about it. The boy replied that he knew all that perfectly well. The girl turned away and realized that soon she would have to find and hide something, so she had to find a safe. But at that moment, Ren showed up, saying that he must have been late to the party. He said he was looking for his brother, but he must have gotten there before him. The eagle also appeared behind him, and the girl was very surprised when she saw them, for she really didn't expect them to want to come too. Ryan in turn wished Her Highness a happy birthday, and then pointed toward the maid, who began rolling his gift out into the hall. The man said that he had prepared a wonderful gift for her that she was sure to like. Siona immediately thought it would be something useful and pleasant, but as soon as she saw what was in it, she was horrified. And all because right in front of her, I was standing in front of Rihanna's golden bust, and he said he was giving her his beautiful face. The girl even froze on the spot. She couldn't say anything for a while. And after that, she looked at the guy, asking what was wrong with him and why he was so narcissistic. Ryan, still smiling, said he was fine and he didn't understand why on earth she was asking that. Well, at that moment, Bitrin came up to her and said that in that case, he also wanted to give her his gift and handed her a small box nicely wrapped. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked, did he also decide to prepare some kind of gift for her? In fact, she didn't even expect them to come, and she didn't even expect them to prepare for it, much less. But when Siona unwrapped it, she saw that the gift was a set of crystal chess sets. They were an incredibly beautiful turquoise color. The girl thought about the fact that it was certainly much better than Rihanna's. The guy, when he heard this, was very surprised, because he thought that she would be over the moon when she saw his beautiful face in gold. Aiden turned to Her Highness then, saying that he now believed it was his turn. But the girl waved her hand in his direction and asked that he wait a moment. He turned toward where the girl was looking, not understanding why she had decided to stop him. But then she saw Tito come in with some boy. Aiden said that it was quite cunning on the part of the Marquis, for she cannot enter the palace herself, so she sent her son Henry there. The boy was standing with a small envelope in his hands and was very shy, so he didn't even say hello to anyone. Henry handed over the gift and started to leave at once, at which Lottie ran, telling him to stop at once and come back, for she had to find out why he had suddenly shown up uninvited. Aiden, in turn, seeing the girl unwrapping the gift, said that at least there was at least a drop of common sense in it, and Henry left rather quickly. Siona, in turn, said that it was an incredibly beautiful fountain pen. Then the man looked at her in surprise and asked, isn't she curious about his gift? She immediately smiled and realized that she had completely forgotten about him. So she asked, is it true that he decided to save the best for last? The boy was a little embarrassed by those words, but then he swallowed the lump and said that his gift for Her Majesty was the sword that the first head of Tillander had used in battle. Siona accepted his gift and said that it must be an incredibly valuable family heirloom, and also added that she would be sure to take good care of it. Even though it was a rather strange birthday present, she still accepted it. But then suddenly a guy walked over and pulled out a sword from there. The girl was very surprised when she saw this, and wondered, is she really only getting a scabbard as a present? Lottie, in turn, was immediately distracted from the fight with her classmates, and called the guy an idiot, since he had actually done that. But Aiden, in turn, said that of course it was all wrong. He was giving it to her with words for her to use it, and it's for her that he's willing to use it just once in honor of her birthday. Soon, when evening came, Siona was considering her presents again, and the butler, when he came to her, inquired, "Is this really what the Duke said? That he was going to be her sword?" Siona said it was exactly like that, and that meant he was willing to use his power for her. She was silent for a while, then turned to the butler asking, "Didn't he say that only the master could control him?" And the one said that this is unprecedented and he's really shocked right now, as much as the girl is. She was a little disappointed by this answer, but said she understood, and realized that they were powerless. She and Lactania had already obtained absolute weapons, but the girl felt that she did not deserve all this at all. So turning to the Titus, she said that all this had happened only because of the loquacious woman who had taken care of her mother. The man smiled and said absolutely, and also brought her his birthday greetings. And so a few days have passed since that time, and many have gathered at the state meeting. One of the men who was there said that it was an official matter, and the guy had no right to speak out like that. He was turning to Ren at this point, and the latter in turn said with a smile that if he shut up, he would do something worse. And then he asked, did he understand that they absolutely loved living like that? He addressed the Marquis of Sandwood, who in turn could answer nothing, but only became even more angry. Siona, who was sitting on a throne not far from them, read the note that said she was to be sent back to Darmil. Then she wondered in surprise. Was his whole plan only to dethrone her? Ryan, in turn, smiling smugly, told him to keep going, because it only gets better that way. The man was reading a note that said that it was a tyrannical crime to ban Princess Bonita for dishonoring the imperial family by engaging in lustful relations, for the crime of embezzlement in the kingdom of Dormil. Thus Her Majesty should be exiled back to her homeland because of such grave offenses. He answered the paper aside, and wondered if that wasn't all there was to it. Siona sighed heavily, and wondered if they had any complaints about the ban for the Marquis. When the man explained that his wife was the only younger sister of the late emperor, and she was the only blood relative of Princess Loctania. Therefore the girl, in his opinion, simply has no right to refuse her visits to the estate. Siona, sighing heavily, said that if she was the empress, she couldn't say such a thing, then wondered what right he, the Marquis, had to kick her out in the first place. He started shouting, saying that it's not a matter of rights at all. He says she is not fit to rule, and even now this affair with Duke Guernia will change the imperial lineage. The boy, in turn, looked at them in surprise, but didn't say anything. Siona smiled and wondered if they really thought it was that bad. The man then looked at her in surprise, not understanding what she meant, and the Empress stood up and began to explain. The girl said that the reason why she was contemplating marrying one of the dukes was because they were the protectors of this empire, and they swore allegiance to the crown princess. And that is why she wants them to tell her if there is anyone among the other nobles who is worthy to sit on that throne in her place. Yes, and besides, she needed to know exactly where this heresy of embezzlement had come from. At this point, she turned to the Duke of Gurn, who immediately stood up. The guy smiled smugly and said that he would definitely make a thorough investigation and find out everything for the Empress. Siona walked to the exit and said that in that case, this meeting is declared adjourned and no further business is to be brought up for discussion. She came out shortly afterward, and Ryan came out right after her. He came closer to her and said he was glad that his plan to overthrow the girl had come to nothing. She, in turn, wondered if he needed something. The guy said with a smile on his face that it was the day of her date with him, so he would like to show her something special. She looked at him in surprise and wondered if he was planning her assassination outside the palace walls. Rian moved closer to her and said that he already thought he'd proven his loyalty in this meeting, and she was just hurting him with words like that. But the girl looked at him sternly and asked that he repeat those words again, but only looking into her eyes. But the man decided to change the subject. saying that he was now more curious as to why everyone was trying so hard to get her attention. But what had that dog done to gain her trust? Siona immediately stopped in place. She realized that something was wrong, and she needed to be more careful with her words. So, after carefully considering her answer, she said that she didn't know what he was even talking about. Her heart was beating very hard, and the guy in turn came closer to her and said that White Shadow had taken up the investigation into the circumstances of His Majesty's death, and he would really like to find out from her why on earth the girl would give him such a task when he is the only person with a personal grudge. He looked her straight in the eye, telling her that the last hound had gone mad because of the Emperor, and as a result she had abused her own child, Aiden. In fact, 10 years ago, Loctania's mother died. Although His Majesty believed it was a murder, the culprit was never found, unfortunately. Then he promised himself that he could find her killer and no one would stand in his way. Indeed, His Majesty tried his best to do so as best he could with Duke Tellender's strength, but after using his power twice on the Emperor's orders, he died of insanity, leaving his young son in perfect loneliness. Ryan explained the story, madam, saying that that was exactly what happened, so it remains a huge mystery to him. Siona realized at that moment what madness Tito was talking about. It was the first time she'd heard of Aiden's tragic past, though, because she'd always thought he was pretty confident and had grown up in a good environment. The girl sighed heavily and said that she hadn't realized that his father had abused him. The lad in turn replied that Duke Leander of Watch wished to do away with his lineage, and that was a fact known to all. Well, seeing her sad and very serious face, the guy decided to change the topic of conversation. He smiled and suggested that she go, for he knew a very good place, and promised that she would certainly like it there. And so after some time, they came in a wagon to a really interesting place. All this, as soon as she got out of the wagon, turned to the Duke and wondered if he was going to roast her alive, and wondered where they were even, and why it was so hot in this place. The man, smiling, helped her out and told her that this farm belonged to his family of the Dukes of Hernea, and especially for her, they gathered all the cute animals for her to look at and admire. Siona looked at him skeptically and wondered if he hadn't said she should like this place, because so far she couldn't see what she was supposed to admire. At that moment he let go of the rabbit he was showing the girl and wondered if she really didn't like it, but he had hoped it would give her pleasure, because he had to say that the way she stood her ground at the meeting had impressed him the most, and he'd decided to surprise her in return. He liked her bravery immensely. When the girl heard all these compliments, she was even very embarrassed. After all, no one had ever praised her before and never noticed her efforts. Her father only always scolded her and humiliated her. Ryan actually thought she was a complete idiot for risking her life for the vainglorious status of Empress. But when the girl suggested that they try to impress her and take advantage of the opportunity, his opinion changed dramatically. However, she couldn't believe that she really didn't realize that every little trick of the beasts was not for her own good, but to keep others in line. Many would become submissive in the face of their imminent doom. This woman, however, she looks at him even with arrogant contempt and dares him to cross her, unafraid of what might happen. More often than not, he reacted to such situations with anger and aggression. However, now it surprised him more, and even made him laugh. When the frost-like girl reacted to his surprise, he was very surprised. He thought she would be happy to hear his praise, but in the end she was only angry. Siona, for her part, didn't understand who would ever need this narcissist's approval. But at that moment they heard the voice of a child addressing his elder brother and Her Majesty. The guy immediately turned in his direction and smiled, saying that he had come after all. Siona immediately turned in his direction to see who it was. When she saw this child, she said that this Vitya was very dangerous and could even threaten his life. She reacted so keenly because the boy rode in on horseback and said he was sorry to keep them waiting. However, glad to welcome them to the farm of the Gurney family. The girl looked at Rian and wondered if he really made the kid ride in such sweltering heat. But the boy happily threw his hands up in the air and said that he was actually perfectly fine. Then the boy smiled smugly and said he was fine, so no need to worry. Soon after, he jumped down from his horse. Then he bowed to the girl, thanking Her Majesty for visiting them. Siona immediately turned to the Lord and told him that he should be more careful getting off the horse. But the boy replied that it was fine. After all, he is quite the friendly guy. She also asked if she wanted to pet him, Siona hesitated for a while, but then decided to trust and came closer and stroked this beautiful animal, which was immediately happy to receive such a sign of attention. Then the boy asked if she liked horses at all. The girl turned in his direction and replied with a smile on her face that she loved absolutely all animals, because each of them was unique. Then he also said that Princess Lactania also liked horses very much. The girl, hearing this, was very much surprised and asked if Lottie really loved them. The guy replied that everything was absolutely right, and that's why he wanted to bring her to this place one day. He looked a little sad, but Siona came close to him and, stroking his head, asked him to wait a little longer. After all, she would ask Lottie later, and she was sure that Lottie would love to come and visit him. When he heard this, he straightway glowed with joy, and he asked, "Was it really true?" The Empress nodded and said that she would bring her next time when the heat died down, so he need not worry, and she would definitely visit this beautiful place. Some time had passed since then, and when it was beginning to get dark outside, they set off back to the manor. The girl said as soon as she got into the carriage that he must really adore his little brother. She also told Rihanna that she's never seen him smile so happily at all before. The boy looked out the window and replied that everything was absolutely right. This boy is an exception among the living people. Siona was very surprised at this way of phrasing it, and thought about how the two of them looked nothing alike at all, and then wondered jokingly if he was sure they were even related. The man suddenly became very serious and said that the woman who gave birth to him also gave birth to a boy. However, he could not guarantee their blood relationship. Siona was very surprised to hear this, for she did not think he could speak of his own mother like that. They were silent for a while, and then Rian asked if he remembered what he had said earlier. The girl wondered if he was referring to Aiden's past. The guy at that moment saw a lot of pity in her gaze and couldn't believe that she was also looking at him. So he held out his hand and told her to ask him what he was most afraid of when she met him. He was sure that answer would be madness. Soon, when Siona finally returned to the manor, Aiden was waiting for her. He asked her how she had spent her time with the snake, seeing her so late. Lottie was also unhappy that it was just the two of them at the event, and tried not to berate her mother so much. The girl, for her part, said that they had visited the farm of the Gurney family, and inquired what they had been doing all this time at all. The princess pointed at the man and said loudly that she wanted her mother to kick him out of the palace. Aiden was indignant and said that it was certainly not up to her, so she might as well not even try to drive him out. He then approached Siona and said that the next time she leaves the palace, he asks that she call on him, for he must protect her. Lottie, who stood behind, raised her hand and said that surely he must protect her from himself, for he was the truest uncouth brute. The girl sighed heavily and didn't understand why they had such a bad relationship. Then she turned to her daughter and said that the Duke's duty was to protect her, so it was natural that he would be around quite often. Lottie sighed heavily and said that he wouldn't be able to defend her at all. After all, he hadn't even been able to do so at that meeting. Aiden decided to turn the conversation to another topic so as not to inflame the situation further, and said that he had come to talk to her about the investigation. The man asked her to let him read the minutes of the meeting. The girl allowed him to do so and said she would let Titus know about it.